On June 30th, 1908, at approximately 7:17 in the morning local time, something fell from the sky over a remote, sparsely populated region of Siberia and nearly ended human civilization as we know it. And to this day, over a century later, we are still not entirely certain what it was. The Tunguska event, as it came to be known, remains one of the most powerful and most mysterious natural disasters in recorded human history. And the most terrifying thing about it is not what happened. It is how easily it could happen again. Witnesses scattered across hundreds of miles of Siberian wilderness reported seeing a column of brilliant bluish-white light, nearly as bright as the sun itself, cutting across the morning sky. Many thought the sky was splitting open. Some fell to their knees and prayed. Others were knocked off their feet by what came next. The explosion. The airburst that occurred over the Tunguska River basin flattened an estimated 80 million trees across more than 800 square miles of dense Siberian taiga forest. 800 square miles. Let that sink in. That is an area roughly the size of the entire metropolitan area of Tokyo, one of the largest cities on Earth. Trees were snapped like matchsticks, stripped completely of their branches, and laid flat in an enormous radial pattern extending outward from a central point, like the spokes of a wheel. The devastation was total and was visible from the air decades later. The explosion released energy estimated at 10 to 15 megatons of TNT equivalent. To put that in terms you can viscerally understand, that is roughly 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. 1,000 Hiroshimas detonated simultaneously over the Siberian wilderness. The atmospheric shockwave generated by the blast circled the entire planet. Twice. Barometric instruments in England, thousands of miles away, registered the pressure pulse. Seismic stations across Europe recorded what they initially believed to be a large earthquake. And for several nights following the event, something eerie and unexplained happened across Europe and Western Russia. The night skies glowed with an unusual, diffuse brightness. In London, people could read newspapers outdoors at midnight by the ambient glow. High-altitude noctilucent clouds, seeded by material from the explosion injected into the upper atmosphere, reflected sunlight long after the sun had set, creating an artificial twilight that lasted for days. And yet, there was no impact crater, no meteorite fragments, no obvious point of contact with the ground. When the Russian mineralogist Leonid Kulik organized the first scientific expedition to reach the blast zone in 1927, nearly 2 decades after the event, he fully expected to find a massive impact crater and recoverable chunks of whatever cosmic object had caused the destruction. He found neither. What he found instead was deeply puzzling. Endless kilometers of flattened forest, scorched and gray, with a strange and unexpected zone of still-standing trees at the very center of the blast area. These trees were stripped completely bare of their branches, but remained upright, like a forest of bare telephone poles. The pattern was eerily consistent with what we now know happens during an airburst detonation, where the blast wave radiates outward and downward from a point high in the atmosphere, pushing trees outward in all directions except directly below the explosion point, where the force pushes straight down, stripping branches but leaving trunks standing. The leading scientific theory today, supported by extensive modeling and analysis, is that a rocky asteroid approximately 100 to 200 feet in diameter entered Earth's atmosphere at a velocity of roughly 30,000 miles per hour and exploded catastrophically at an altitude of 3 to 6 miles above the ground. The intense heat and aerodynamic pressure of atmospheric entry at that speed caused the object to fracture, heat beyond its structural tolerance, and ultimately disintegrate entirely before it could reach the surface. It vaporized in midair, converting its enormous kinetic energy into a thermal and pressure blast equivalent to a large nuclear weapon. That is why there is no crater. The weapon never hit the ground. It detonated in the sky. But here is what makes this story genuinely, existentially terrifying when you consider the bigger picture. The Tunguska event was pure, blind, dumb luck. The explosion occurred over one of the most remote, least populated regions on the entire planet. The area beneath the blast had a population density of essentially 0. If that same object had arrived approximately 4 hours and 52 minutes later in its orbit, the rotation of the Earth would have placed the city of St. Petersburg, then a bustling metropolis of well over 1 million people, and the cultural capital of the Russian Empire, directly beneath the blast. The city would have been completely obliterated. Every building, every person, every trace of one of Europe's great cities, gone in a fraction of a second. And Tunguska-class events are not vanishingly rare on geological timescales. Scientists estimate that objects of this size collide with Earth roughly every few hundred to thousand years. We had a smaller but still dramatic reminder in 2013, when a meteor approximately 60 feet across exploded over the Russian city of Chelyabinsk, shattering windows across the city and injuring over 1,500 people. That object was roughly one-third the size of the Tunguska impactor. Tunguska was orders of magnitude more powerful. Today, organizations like NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office and the European Space Agency's Near-Earth Object Coordination Center actively track and catalog near-Earth objects. We have identified and are monitoring the vast majority of the truly enormous asteroids, the civilization enders over 1 kilometer in diameter. The probability of one of those hitting Earth in the next century is extremely low. But the Tunguska-sized objects, the city killers and region destroyers in the 100 to 300-foot range, we have found and cataloged perhaps 30 to 40% of the estimated population. The rest are out there right now, orbiting the sun in paths that cross Earth's orbit, invisible against the blackness of space, and we would likely have only days or perhaps weeks of warning before an impact. The day that almost ended civilization happened over a century ago in an empty forest. Next time, the forest might be a city. The question is not whether it will happen again, it is when, and whether we will be ready. If you want to keep exploring the events that have shaped and nearly destroyed our world, subscribe. The universe is far